Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Welcome to another program of the Classics Show. I am your host, Shabnum Riaz. As always, it's wonderful to be here. And the same thing I say over and over again, and each time I'm going to introduce a program, I think I should say something else. But this is something that comes out naturally, and it's just that it is always such a pleasure to be able to take out the time to talk about literature, music, the arts, classics, all those soothing things in life that we need. If you sort of think of today's fast-paced world and the environment that we live in, we need to slow down a bit. We need to take out some time to have some soul food, and that's what I love to call it. And that's why I just absolutely love hosting this program. It does a lot for me as well. I learn so much from it, and I'm sure you do as well. Well, to talk about the topic that we're going to talk about today in today's program is today is a tribute to Khwaja Khurshid Anwer. And in today's tribute, well, we're going to discuss this iconic personality. He was a filmmaker, writer, director, music composer. And, the thing about his music was he was one of the most original and inventive music directors of his time, gaining a lot of popularity in Pakistan and India as well. Okay, so to talk about Khwaja Khurshid Anwer, we have with us in the studio today an expert, Mr. Waqas Khwaja, who's a professor of English literature and creative writing from the Agnes Scott College in Atlanta. Thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you. I'm privileged to be here.
Well, that's wonderful to have you here as well. We are going to, really, because Waqas Sahab is also he's going to talk to us about creative writing as well. So, don't change the channel, and we'll have that towards the end of the program. Anyone who's interested in creative writing and to explore the dynamics behind it, we're going to give you lots of tips for that. Okay, Waqas, when we talk about, such an iconic personality as Khurshid Anwer, early life and the events that unfold, the family you are born into, the environment you are given, that makes a huge difference to where a child is going to go in life.
It does,
absolutely. And this was the same in the case here, as Khurshid Anwer had a father who was very, very interested in music, and so the environment at home gave him that opportunity to connect with classical music. Tell us a bit about his childhood.
And that's very interesting, because he did not belong to a traditional music family. His father was a barrister, a well-known barrister in Lahore, and growing up, he was obviously interested in a whole lot of other subjects as well. His master's from Government College Lahore was in philosophy, and he was a contemporary of Faiz Ahmed Faiz, and they became friends during that time at Government College and remained friends throughout, very close friends throughout.
And in fact, Faiz Ahmed Faiz said that he was inspired. He acknowledged the fact that he was inspired from him.
And that's right, but they had an empathetic relationship. It's a fascinating subject in its own right. And it is said that actually Khurshid Anwer was more interested in writing poetry at that time, and Faiz Sahab was interested in perhaps, filmmaking and other things, or music.
That is amazing.
But they switched later on.
I see.
And that is an interesting little detail. Also, while Khurshid Anwer was doing his master's in philosophy from the philosophy department, Faiz Sahab was in the English literature department. And it is also rumored, it is traditionally said, if you would put it that way, that Faiz Saab attended the philosophy classes and Khurshid Anwer attended the literature classes. Faiz Saab topped in his masters in English and Khurshid Saab topped in masters in philosophy. So there is that additional interesting information that is retailed, you know, in circles that were close to these people at that time. And so, you know, this is how it has come to us as well. But during his younger days, as I said, he was the eldest child of Khwaja Ferozuddin. And there was this family atmosphere where Ferozuddin Saab was interested in hosting musical soirees of, again, classical music, singing sessions as it was, all-nighters as it was.
And these were weekly functions, were they?
Right, and Khurshid Anwer very early seemed to be drawn towards that, interested in a very deep way. He was also somewhat shy, you know, as he was growing up, and perhaps remained through all his life, except with very close friends. But again, what we have heard is that he would shut himself up in a room and try to imitate the singers that you know, that he heard. And among them was this very famous classical maestro, Ustad Tawakkul Hussain Khan. And he would try and imitate the way Tawakkul Saab sang. And once Ustad Tawakkul Hussain Saab heard this, and he said, this child has a gift for music. And later in life, as it came about, Khurshid Anwer acknowledged him as his mentor, as his
Murshid.
You know, Murshid, if you will. Yes, that is the person that he learned from, and greatly respected throughout his life. So he had, in other words, which is very interesting, a deep grounding in classical music, while not being born in the tradition of classical music, you know, people who sort of sang that, the exponents of classical music as it was.
Right. You made an interesting point there, an observation, that he was shy. When it comes to shy people, would you say that they're more drawn to creative endeavors because this is a way to express themselves, whereas, you know, in a social confinement, they might find it hard to interact with people in general? Would this be something that would be more of an attractive option for a shy person to actually be more creative?
I think that's very well said, because I would say it's a very persuasive argument to make, and I am drawn towards it too, for the same reason that it seems that society forces roles on you, and you may not be comfortable with that role or those roles, even in terms of gender dynamics for that matter. And when that happens, there may be this reaction of becoming sort of isolated from society, or reaction the other way for that matter, where you try and imitate what you see around you and let it go. But I think for the creative artist, for a person who has this energy inside her or him, there are other ways out, imaginative ways out, inventive ways out. And this is creativity that we are talking of. And yes, it seems to me that there is something to be said about the creative writer being sort of someone who finds expression out of this shyness.
Exactly.
Through music, through art, through literature, a whole lot of these fields that, you know, that we admire so much, but don't compensate very well.
Yes, true. And it's also, you know, it's also such a challenge for a person who is shy or maybe introverted in nature to be able to put a piece of their soul onto canvas, onto a music, you know, in the form of music notes, in the form of poetry, in the form of prose. It is something so personal that you're basically, as Hemingway said, you know, the easiest thing is you sit in front of a typewriter and bleed. So there is your soul exposed in front of all these people. So that's also something very courageous to do, isn't it?
It is. On the one hand, you have shy. It's paradoxical again. It's very interesting. On the one hand, you're shy. On the other hand, what you're putting on canvas or what you're expressing yourself through music that you create or through poetry, it is literally a bearing of the very sort of very entrails of your soul, if I may use a mixed metaphor here, because that is making yourself very vulnerable in many ways. But you do that, and you take the risk of sharing it with the public.
Exactly.
And when you do that, of course, you know, then if you get acclaim and recognition or affirmation, I'm sure there must be some satisfaction in that. But artists are normally very restless people.
Very restless and very sensitive.
Right. And so they are more critical about what they do than the public or the critic ever can be.
Right.
People don't seem to realize that. Because somebody whose pursuit is excellent, who's serving the muse of art, if you will, is always going to say, this is not quite what I wanted.
Enough.
You know,
the perfectionists,
yes.
aren't they?
So Khurshid Anwer was one of those people who's recognized to be that kind of a meticulous artist, a perfectionist, if you will.
And hence the reason that, you know, he's still so timeless. So when we talk about his early career, that started in India. Tell us a bit about those moments and, you know, him really coming into the public eye and how that all happened.
Now, it's very interesting that while he was at government college, he was also involved in what came to be known as a picric acid case, where acid was being stolen from the science labs and being used, diverted for purposes of making bombs, if you will, against the British imperialist regime. And it was a very close call. He was convicted in the first, at the first level, at the sessions level, I suppose, and later on cleared of this accusation, of this conviction. But that meant that in a way prevented him from having a public career. His parents wanted him to, his father in particular wanted him to take the civil services examination, and he did take the civil services examination. It is again said, that we have heard, is that he stopped in 7 or 9 papers out of 11, something like that. But when he was being interviewed, he said, yes, you know, I was involved in this case, and that was the end of his sort of so-called bureaucratic pretensions, which were in any case forced by the parents, which was something that was, you know, a family pressure issue more than anything else. So he joined All India Radio in Delhi as a program producer in music. And the director there was Anil Biswas, who's a very famous music composer in the Indian tradition, film tradition. Saadat Hasan Manto worked there as well, and they were very close friends.
Such great names again, you see, so that also makes such a difference when you talk about people like this, the other names that they were affiliated with, and you imagine the quality of the environment where you have all these people together, you know, these great intellectual minds. Waqas, we'll come back to this discussion. Right now we have to go for a break. Stay tuned, and we'll be back in a minute. Okay, welcome back. Well, we were having a wonderful discussion about Khurshid Anwer, who was, you know, an iconic filmmaker, writer, director, music composer, brought lots of innovation at his time, still remembered for the fantastic music that he has passed on through generations. Waqas, before we went to the break, we were talking about how Khurshid Anwer, how his life started. It started in India, and you were telling us about his first job was in All India Radio.
All India Radio in Delhi, and as I mentioned, that Manto was one of his colleagues and became very good friends. And it was through Manto Saab that he was introduced to A.R. Kardar and given his break for the first sort of stint as a music composer. In the film, it was a Punjabi film, Kurmai. And the music was a top hit for that movie. That's where people recognized immediately that this was a voice, new voice in Indian music. And we need to hear this, are new sounds that we are hearing in Indian music. I'll talk a little bit about the music of Kurmai in a minute, but I do want to mention that Manto was a very close friend of Khurshid Saab, and it was in Manto Saab's house or apartment that he put up when he was in Bombay. And he perhaps did not did not know to manage his money very well. So whenever he got his money, it was deposited with Safiya Manto Saab's wife, so that she would then distribute it, budget it and distribute it to him over the month, so that he would not spend it in the first 5 days of the month. So that's just a little detail that I thought people might find interesting.
Exactly.
But the music of Kurmai, which is it's a Punjabi film, which is also, as you see, a sort of interesting phenomena. The Urdu or the Hindi film industry, it's the Urdu film industry.
And people, I mean, that's something that is, widely, it's selling very well, and then him coming into the Punjabi.
Right, straight away, and, composing a music for that. And that music is so extraordinary in the sense, first, it is all based on classical ragas, which one can immediately detect by listening to the songs themselves. But then what is unique about Khurshid, this was like 1942. What is unique about Khurshid Anwer is that he's creating a totally new orchestra there. The sounds that you hear with Western instruments and Eastern instruments combined, they are sounds that a music composer actually composes.
So that was fusion at that time.
Right. So it's not something, in other words, that you pick up from somewhere and just fit into the tune. These were musical interludes that he had created and composed himself, and they were very sophisticated. There were examples of people using sophisticated orchestration before that. R.C. Boral, for instance, is a very good example to bring. There were others who were mostly using interludes from the Eastern tradition, which wasn't as sophisticated, by the way, the instrumental tradition, as it was in the West. The orchestral tradition is what I'm talking about. So he introduced something which is original in the sense that it was a fusion of, as you rightly said, the Western and the Eastern tradition. The Western instruments actually in dialogue with the Eastern instruments.
Fantastic.
And then creating this new sound, or these new sounds, that greatly embellished and enriched the tune itself, or the tunes themselves, because they were all these songs that we are talking of. And then the interesting thing is somehow he managed to retain the Punjabi flavor as well, because there were evocations of Punjabi folk in those songs as well. Now when we go back and listen to them, I mean, it is with awe that you hear all over again this remarkable, I think, transitional moment, if I may say so, in Indian film music, where something new has come about. And it is so original, it is so fresh, that even after all these years, you can't miss that freshness.
It strikes a chord.
Yeah, you can't miss that originality.
That's so true. So, there's a science behind that too, isn't it?
Absolutely.
To create something that is so in sync with each other, and for everything to complement each other in such a way that it immediately gave him recognition. That was something that was an inborn trait. He was a genius at what he was doing. It was something that he'd nurtured over the years, or was it a combination of everything?
On this view, on this point, I think people may have all kinds of views. My personal view is simply this: that what we talk of genius is, I would agree with, Edison, who said this. That genius is 1% genius and 99% hard work or perspiration. This is what it is. It's the discipline of learning as well. You may have a natural gift of some kind or the other, but unless you nurture it, unless you learn and nurture it, evolve it, it's not going to be expressed in a way that is going to be effective or long-lasting, impactful, and so on. So I believe it's a combination of the two that happens here.
Right.
What I think is quite interesting is, if I may say so, there's a little technical point here that Western music can be scored. It can be reduced to, the script, the score, as it is. And then, yes, the individual performance depends on the conductor, who can make certain sort of variations, but very limited within the score itself. It is a score that is reproduced more or less in the same way over and over again, barring that little imprint, or sometimes the imprint is a little greater, of the conductor or not. Eastern music, Eastern tradition, which is more of the vocal kind rather than the instrumental kind in terms of the singing tradition that I'm talking of here, is more improvisation. It is improvisatory. It is something akin to jazz, for instance.
Right.
You start with the theme and then you sort of embellish it and you take it in all different directions and
experiment.
You do that over a period of an hour, hour and a half, etc. So, and you have no score before you. You have the other performances before you, but you don't want to sound like anyone else that has performed before, and yet you're performing the same raga. So you're going to give it your distinct rendering. And so this allows a certain freedom, a certain fluency or fluidity to it that is not quite present in the performance when you talk about orchestration in the West. So he was combining these two.
And getting the, you know, the optimum benefit from both of them.
Right, and this is something to be recognized because this is a hybrid art, if you will. And here's an original artist trying to do this, or starting out.
And very successfully.
And yes, very successfully right from the start. So I think that is the huge contribution, even at the very inception of his career, the very first movie that he makes, that immediately brought him to the attention of the cognoscenti all across India. This is somebody that we need to pay attention to.
Right.
And
in fact, the music composers of that time had, so, you know, acknowledged him to be somebody that they were disciples of. Shankar Jaikishan and the other.
Well, Roshan was an assistant with him in his early movies. Sajjad Saab, who's a great composer in his own right, also assisted him in a couple of movies. So there was that. But then there was also the admiration and friendship of other legendary composers. And among them, Anil Biswas was a lifelong friend, of course. Then there was Naushad Saab, who was a lifelong friend. So there was all of that that was going on.
And these are names that, you know, we can just talk about and mention, but they, in their own right, they were such
they were amazing
icons
composers.
as
They
well.
were, absolutely.
What would you say, Waqas, our generation today, how many of them would know these names? How many of them would even have heard of Naushad or, you know, Shankar Jaikishan or Roshan? Or,
you know,
and why is that?
I would like to believe that people know these names. Maybe I want to delude myself about this. If they don't, it is an impoverishment of our cultural heritage. This is what I will say. And I think it is something that we ought to know. We may know the names of the leading groups all across the Western world, by the way. And that is not a negative thing. We need to know that.
Exactly. And we'll know that, and the kids will also know them from the 60s and the 70s. And, you know.
But why don't we know these names? That is something very crucial because it gives us a kind of rootedness.
Of course.
That I think would engender that kind of pride that we need for the pursuit of excellence in anything we do. I mean, you don't have to be a music composer to like Naushad or Khurshid Anwer or Sajjad, you know, or Anil Biswas or Khemchand Prakash. But what they do to you is you see this and you say, you know, look at the level of work that they produced. And if I'm a scientist or if I'm a writer, I'd like to maintain this level of excellence in my own work as well. So it's not only in your own art form or profession that you find models. You can find them anywhere. And these are classic models for us from our not so long past history, by the way.
The name of our program is The Classics Show. The classics in general, they remain timeless. They remain in the, you know, they remain in the moment that which they were created. Are we doing justice to them? Are we opening that treasure box enough? Are we sharing those gems enough? What should be our responsibility? Because we've been given a legacy by them. What should we be doing?
I think there has been what I would call a post-colonial lapse. And I use that word to suggest that we have been so overcome by our colonial tradition that we are still finding it difficult to articulate our own voice, our own identity. So there is one tendency, which is also very natural in a post-colonial phase, which is a transitional phase. It is meant to go away at some time. The tendency is to imitate the colonial masters of the past. And if we do that, we internalize all the prejudices and biases of that colonial period, which meant they did not quite treasure these arts at the same level as they did their own. Even if they appreciated them, they said, well, yes, there is Eastern music, but then Western music is superior. Yes, there is Eastern literature, but this is superior. But what is interesting is that when you find magical realism in the Mahabharata or in the Dastan or in Katha Surt Sagar, you say, well, you know, this is strange kind of magic and superstition. When you find it in Marquez or when you find it in, you know, new magical realist writers, you say, wow, you know, look at what the West is doing. This is quite remarkable. Right. So I think we need to have a better understanding.
And more confidence.
Yes, of what we have, what our ancestors have achieved in the past, and how we can actually not only value that tradition, but take it forward as well. So the post-colonial lapse is that we have stopped looking at these artifacts or these great achievements or products of the past. And I think it is time that we pay attention to that. By just imitating the West, we are also imitating its worst, not only its worst sort of biases and prejudices, but also its worst propensities, which are unfortunately still acquisitive, which are still very much in the nature of, you know, capitalist sort of grabbing of whatever you can for yourself for personal need and personal gain. What is important to understand is that there's always a community that produces, even the classics, even the great artists, if you will. There are many extraordinary, brilliant performers that are already performing in a society, in every field, for them to then produce that iconic name that we talk about, that we hear about from generation to generation. By putting down those very writers or those very composers or those very creators that we are talking of in society, just because they are not already classics, they are not already iconic, because we don't recognize them as such today, right. I think, again, makes us much more liable to sort of decline in our pursuit, as I would say,
and
of what would be excellent.
And being taken hostage for our identity.
Yes. Yeah.
Because isn't it your identity that actually will shape you and keep you together in every corner of the world that you'll go to? So, you know, we're sort of deviating off topic here, but we'll come back to Khurshid Saab. This is all synonymous with his discussion as well. The importance of parents in, you know, those dinner table conversations where a person would ask, you know, how was your day? What's been happening? A general conversation where you talk about things. The responsibility of one generation to carry on the importance of our culture, of our heritage. It's something. Is it being realized today in sort of the in-between the iPads and the iPhones and the social media onslaught and the television blaring in the background as well?
You know, I think, again, Khurshid Anwer becomes very relevant here now in terms of his filmmaking, because just the kind of topic that we were addressing a minute ago, the idea of the Western attitudes leading to some of the negative propensities there also, which is isolationism, by the way, individualism in the extreme.
And we're actually seeing that on the political scenario. If you look at it now, it's very reflective. I mean, we don't want to politicize the program, but then if you're looking at Brexit and you're looking at the US as well, a sentiment is being brought forward that you can't ignore.
We pretend that, you know, we should not be nationalists because, again, you know, that's not the right intellectual attitude to have, and to an extent I think I would agree with that, but then when the very nations that we try to ape are nationalist, then we have a problem, then we have a world of the kind of conflict that we see today. And I go back to this idea of that there is a problem with this notion of capitalism, just as there is a problem with this notion of communism. You label these things and you're also slotting and curtailing people in communities of a certain kind, forcing them to be there and not to be able to move out freely to be who they are. So social justice doesn't mean one ism or the other. Actually, it means everyone gets the benefit of living in a society. Humanism, or everyone gets the benefit of living in a society, which means looking at society as a community. So something of the individualism needs to be given up in order for the society to have that sense of community. And the community sense should not be so great that it'll suffocate individual thinking at the same time. So it's a very delicate balance to be maintained, but it is a balance that we have to maintain for a healthy, robust society. So unfortunately, what we see in this case, but the sort of question that you asked is that in our generation there is, or in the younger generation, I'm from an older generation now, so the younger generation also what we are seeing is this tendency towards just individual achievement, this tendency towards what can I get out of this situation, instead of saying, okay, there are other people here and we have to move together in this. How can we move together in that as well? And that means a greater sense of community. A greater sense of community is not a negative thing, it's a very positive thing, because that is what creates that healthy atmosphere for the kind of things that we love to talk about. You know, we talk about classics. Classics don't occur as individual classics. They are the production of very live, robust, healthy societies. And this is what is missing. Dinner table conversations, yes, but who wants to have dinner table conversations now? We want to have a burger here or grab paratha there on our own and then go to work, you know, do whatever we are doing. Ideas that we had about gathering around a table and just sort of talking, not just as a family, but there could be, you know, friends as well. You're sitting down and just having a conversation, intellectual conversation, not about, you know, where did you get this shirt from, or, you know, I went to this particular store and I
where are
got
the
this
latest
one.
sales?
You know, that kind of stuff. So really, those are things that are missing in many ways, not just from our society, from Western societies
As well, definitely.
And people who realize that try to inculcate them in what you would call alternate sort of community sense, in alternate cultures, whether it is the sidewalk coffee culture, you know, it is the informal writers group that groups that people get together in, or artist group, or reading groups that people get into. And it is trying to be, I would say the academia has tried all these years to sort of introduce that kind of an atmosphere into their teaching regimen as well. So when we talk of creative writing, for instance, you have these MFAs and all that. They're regimented forms of the very informal get-together of writers that produced, you know, that the wonderful atmosphere that younger writers needed to be mentored by perhaps published writers, better writers, or writers who had already made a name for themselves into the next phase of their careers.
And that is such an important point, in fact, that you made. We will come back to this in the remaining part of the program. We'll definitely talk about mentorship. We'll talk about role models, because that is something that is our youth are sort of pining and yearning for these role models and mentors as well. Okay, now as we were talking about Khurshid and Rizab and, you know, his start, he started with a bang, and everyone was sitting up and taking notice. After that, what were his notable works, his songs and awards? And then we'll talk about his coming to Pakistan.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of that. But in India, he made only 7 movies. And 2 of them won the Best Music of the Year award. One was Nishana, the other was Singhar. And the compositions were quite extraordinary for these 2 musics, these 2 films. There were other notable compositions in other movies as well, but these were the 2 that stand out apart from Kurmai that we mentioned earlier. Then he transferred to Pakistan.
What were the conditions for coming to Pakistan? How did he make that journey?
He had contracts in India at that time, at the time of partition, and Singhar was just about to be released at that time. Its release was delayed from 47 to 48, by the way, by a year. But it was obvious that the family, since the family belonged to Lahore, we are originally Kashmiris. I mean, they were originally Kashmiris, and they transferred to Lahore in the 1880s. So Khurshid Anwer then came to Lahore, where the family was, and this is where he wanted to start the second career, as it is.
Right.
There's an interesting little detail here as well, if I may mention
please.
that. In one of the movies that he made, it was Parwana. Actually, Parwana was the 3rd movie. I should have mentioned that as well. It's a very well-regarded movie as far as his music is concerned.
Okay.
And the last 4 songs that Sahgal ever sang for the film were for Parwana. So,
and again, the combination of music genius as in composition and then with such a voice.
yes.
I mean, that
yes.
was absolutely amazing.
It was, and those songs were very, very much appreciated, again, by the general public as well as music composers who were great in their own right. Now, when he had come back to Pakistan, he got this letter from the director of that movie, Parwana, J.K. Nanda, who was his very close friend. And he mentioned that there was this sort of movie group that was looking for a composer, and it seems like Khurshid Anwar's name had been suggested for that music studio. And if Khurshid Anwar went there to compose the music, this was in India, that he should also keep in mind J.K. Nanda, because J.K. Nanda in his letter said that he was out of job at that point. And this letter is preserved in the family archives, which is very interesting. So it turned out that the studio that was looking for a composer and that wanted Khurshid Anwar to compose the music for the movie that they were planning was a studio that was making Mughal-e-Azam. And it was for Mughal-e-Azam that Khurshid Anwar was being asked to compose the music. So he traveled all the way to Bombay for that. And what we hear is what we hear from the recounting of people who knew about this incident. So as I said, I have no written account to fall back upon, but I do have the recounting of other people who knew what was going on at that time, and as Khurshid Anwar told them about this. That the studio owner placed a check before him and said, well, you can fill out whatever amount you want to. We want you to compose the music of this great movie that we plan.
So he was given a blank check?
A blank check.
Okay.
So just fill out whatever compensation you want for this and so on, and there it is. We'll accept it. And Khurshid Anwar, being Khurshid Anwar, pushed the check back and said, well, I'm not interested in this. Actually, there's a friend of mine, J.K. Nanda, and I would want J.K. Nanda to direct the movie, and if that happens, yes, I will compose the music. And they said, this cannot be. We have our own director, who is a very famous, very accomplished director, Mahboob. And Khurshid Anwar said, then I'm sorry, I won't compose the music of this movie. And I can't believe it, but this is
the loyalty.
This is what we heard, and this is amazing. And it seems that Manto Saab was instrumental in connecting Khurshid Saab to this, or recommending Khurshid Saab to this company or this studio. And Manto was incensed.
Must have been.
And that letter that he wrote to Khurshid Anwar, what have you done? Are you out of your mind? What is this? And with that letter, Manto sent him the cuttings of papers, several cuttings of papers, which showed upcoming films in which J.K. Nanda was the director. So, is it the gullibility of this great artist that we are talking about? Is it loyalty of some kind? What is this? This is a quixotic situation, but it is what it is. And so I think it makes the person, to me, even more endearing. For
that's absolutely true.
You know, this is a situation. Now he had a visa for 40 days for India at that time, and he was not going to compose the music for Mughal-e-Azam. He immediately got another contract for this movie that was called Neelam Pari.
Okay.
Neelam Pari was the movie. He got the contract for that, and he composed the music for Neelam Pari in 40 days. I think 12 songs.
Wow. And
they're sung by Asha and Geeta. For the first time, he was using Asha there. And one song, the only song that Khurshid Anwar did with Rafi, one song is by Rafi as well in that movie, sung by Rafi as well.
Again, another phenomenal name.
Very interesting music of that movie as well. But then he came back to Pakistan, and then the rest of his career is in Pakistan.
Imagine the naiveness and the vulnerability. I mean, that just says so much. But at the same time, the word that you used, endearing, it is a very endearing quality because it's something that is so scarce.
Yes, I mean, it is there, and it's human, you know, it's very human. It's like, okay, yes, you know, very wise person,
Yeah.
Genius,
Yeah.
talent, all given.
But this is him, and take it or leave it. He had his morals, he had his values, he had his code of conduct.
Yes.
Whereas other people didn't, obviously.
Yes.
So yeah, you're right. That is very, very interesting. Okay, so in Pakistan, the first film was Intizar.
Well, it was, the music that he composed was for, I think, Mirza Saiban before that.
Okay.
But then it was Intizar that he made, in which he kind of also was part of the direction. This was a movie that he made with Imtiaz Ali Taj and I think Masood Parvez, all of them together were involved in this. So this was the team, this was his movie, if you will. And this was the movie that he then took to India. At that time, the movies between India and Pakistan had not been banned, as it were. You could see each other's movies. So they could cross this political border. And he took this movie with him to India to promote it. And it was enormously popular there. And it is ironic and paradoxical that it was not Pakistan that first banned Indian movies. It was because of this movie that India banned Pakistani movies. It was so popular.
Imagine. Imagine that. And it also, for Madame Noor Jahan, it was also something for her as well. That, you know,
this was the first time that Khurshid Anwer paired with Madame Noor Jahan for the songs. And those songs are out of this world.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think one has to recognize Noor Jahan has sung the most extraordinary songs for all composers. But it seems to me what she has sung for Khurshid Anwer is of a different class. And then the number of songs that she sang for him, they are extraordinary. I mean, one classic after the other. You just can't stop sort of talking about that. Amazing, amazing combination.
Do we also then have a chemistry between a music composer and the person who's going to execute those, you know, that creativity? How important is that relationship and the harmony between both talents?
I think it is of the most utmost and crucial importance. And yes, there was an amazing chemistry between these two artists. You know, people may perform very well under any circumstances, but unless they are tested, they don't break that dimension of what can be done. And I think this is what happened with Khurshid Anwer and Noor Jahan, that when they combined for any musical experience, it was actually almost always the case that they were treading in territory that was uncharted. They actually produced work that was over and above what was expected anywhere. And the excellence of those songs, in fact, again, I keep repeating the word, but that is perhaps the more appropriate word, cannot be doubted or denied. Chand Hase Duniya Basi, I mean, I don't know if a better composition has been made.
Chand Hase Duniya Basi, roye mera pyar re, dard bhare dil ke mere toot gaye taar. Chand hase duniya basi, roye mera pyar re, dard bhare dil ke mere toot gaye taar. Chand hase. पलकों की छाँव तले अश्कों की आग जले, तेरी खबर पाऊँ कहाँ, जाऊँ कहाँ, बस न चले.
जिस दिन से पिया दिल ले गए, amazing song. Sawan ki ganghor khatao. I mean, you can go, this is just Intizar we are talking of. Wo Jaane Wale Re. You know, you could go on and on with that, just in that one movie.
One masterpiece after the other.
It is amazing how it is done. And then he had this composition from Noor Jahan that was made in the Western tradition. And that also is extraordinary. Aankh Se Aankh Mila Le is the one which he sings
And
for
there
a bar.
was also Rim Chim.
Well, that came in a later movie that was
But
in Koil.
there was something very interesting that you had to share about that as
Well,
well.
yes, I will come to that in a minute, but I want to say something about Intezar also, because that is true. There were 6 movies that he produced or directed with screenplay and music as well, so a lot of involvement in the making of the movies. Intezar was the first of them, but then there were a spate of other movies, or not a spate of other movies, but there were these 5 other movies that we are talking about. Anyway, so what you see in Intezar is you have these twin brothers on the one hand. One is westernized and one values the Eastern tradition, although he too dresses in the Western code as it is, in suits and pants, if you will. But at the same time, he also has, of course, he has the Eastern dress as well, but there is this clash, if you will, or this tension between the West and the East. And this signifies his theme through the number of movies that he made, whether it is Jhumar, whether it is Chingari, whether it is Hamraz, and there was I already mentioned Chingari, and there's one other movie that we need to talk about. Anyway, so the Ghungat, you see that kind of tension there. But you have these twin brothers, and they both court the same woman. And it is the woman ultimately who has to decide which one she wants. It's like the soul of the nation is at stake here. So from a very early sort of part of his career, filmmaking career, you have the woman in a central position to decide, to choose which one of the 2 ways does she want to go. And this is like the new identity of the nation. I see that as a thematic, if you will, the post-colonial thematic, if you will. So one of the brothers actually composes music, doesn't compose music actually, is the owner of this theater for which this Western composer composes, a westernized composer composes music. And the other sort of side of this is that the woman that both these brothers love is totally immersed in Eastern classical music because her father is this classical player and singer, sarod player and singer. So there is this clash between music, there's this clash of themes, etc., that comes across. And the Easternized twin brother, if you will, or however you want to put it, that person has been rendered lame. His leg has been cut off by a person who actually wants him to go away as a competitor for the love of that woman, because he wants to use this love interest in the theater. And he's working on behalf of the westernized brother, though the brother doesn't know that he's using such extreme methods to do this. So the theme, as you can see, as I'm recounting it, you can see becomes a very post-colonial theme. Our society has been lamed, hamstrung by colonialism. And we have to move out of that stage. And really, it is our soul that is at stake, if you will. That
is just so, that's so deep what you just said, and I just wish we would be able to realize this, that we have this huge legacy and we have to carry it on, and this is something that is so important, Waqas. We have so much. Yeah. Why are we giving it up so easily? Right. Why are we so ready to surrender? Please, because we're coming to the end of the program right now, and we won't have much time to discuss any further. Please tell us about, because we're going to also play that song as well, and some of the very, very famous songs that Khurshid Saab was well known for. So please mention some of those very briefly.
Well, there are a whole number of songs, but since you mentioned Rim Jim Pade Pohar, I'd like to mention something about that. It is from the film Koil, and the title song of that is a malhar, which is known to be a rain song, if you will, classical song, as it is sung by Fateh Ali Khan, because in that movie, the father of, again, the love interest woman is is a classical singer, but doesn't earn very well. He's known across the country, because when he sings, he not just moves people. In this case, when he sings the Malhar,
He moves nature.
you see that nature is moved, and you actually have rain falling
Right.
at that point. Fantastical as it may seem, there are people across the world who believe that music has the power to do this.
Influence nature.
And I was mentioning to you before the program this book called Musicophilia by Oliver Sacks, a very well-known scientist, by the way, who's also a fine literary writer. He died a couple of years ago, who mentions the Western tradition also, that musical harmonies have the ability to allay pain, relieve sickness, change the atmosphere, sort of your environment in ways that are conducive to, you're feeling better or you're feeling not so good, etc., and so on and so forth. It's a very interesting book. So that was the theme there. And then Noor Jahan sang this song also later on in that movie. Oh, sorry, sang Rim Jim Pade Pohar later on in this movie. But the first rendition of Rim Jim Pade Pohar is by the two sisters Nahid Niazi and Marukh Niazi. And that is one of the songs that became very famous. It's a children's song. They are on a swing, both these kids, the male and the female, and it's raining, and they sing this song. So if you have that song available, it would be wonderful.
Waqas, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure to be able to talk to you today. The conversation has flowed, amazingly, and there's so much more that we could have talked about. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much.
So, something that I think today's program was really, not only was it just completely endearing in the way that we were talking about timelessness and the way that we should really, connect back to our identity, the legacy that we have been given. Fine, the world is a global village, but do take pride in who you are, where you've come from, and the people that we have that have given us such wonderful, fantastic gems that we should really admire and open up that box from time to time and look at the jewels that are there. So until next time, stay happy, stay blessed. Bye-bye.